Rome had cheated death before, but in 1071, on a lonely battlefield far from Constantinople's protective walls, betrayal shattered the empire's future in a single day. Hello, and welcome to Impactful Moments, where we explore some of the most, you guessed it, impactful moments in human history. In this video, we'll explore the Battle of Manzikert, one of the most consequential clashes of the medieval world, and a turning point that brought over 1,500 years of Roman legacy to its knees. After the Roman Empire split in 395, its western half steadily declined under repeated barbarian invasions, ultimately coming to its official end in 476. But the eastern half, now known as the Byzantine Empire, endured, carrying on Rome's legacy from their brilliant capital of Constantinople. Its borders shifted over time, but for centuries the Byzantines controlled the Balkans, Anatolia, and parts of the Middle East. By the 7th century, however, years of war with the Sassanid Persians and waves of bubonic plague had left the Byzantines weakened. This made them vulnerable to a new force, the Islamic Caliphates, which seized much of the eastern Byzantines' territories. Though Constantinople itself withstood siege after siege, Anatolia remained in Byzantine hands, and a long struggle between Eastern Christianity and Islam had begun. Further east, the Muslim world was evolving. In 751, the Abbasid Caliphate defeated the Chinese Tang dynasty at the Battle of Talas, deepening Islamic influence in Central Asia. Over the next 2 centuries, many Turkic tribes converted to Islam, including the Seljuks. By the 11th century, the Seljuks had transformed from a nomadic tribe into a formidable force, formally establishing an empire in 1037, beginning their expansion westward. Though the Abbasids still held religious authority in Baghdad, their political power was in decline. The Shia Fatimids had already broken away, establishing a rival caliphate based in Cairo. And in 1055, the Seljuk leader, Turgil Bey, entered Baghdad and was named Sultan, effectively taking control of the Sunni Islamic world and allowing the Abbasid Caliph to retain symbolic authority. Flush with power, the Seljuks' western expansion continued. In 1064, they captured the Armenian capital of Ani, pushing their frontier directly up against Byzantine territory. Meanwhile, back in Constantinople, the situation was deteriorating. The empire had enjoyed a golden age under Basil II, a ruler known for both military brilliance and effective governance. But when he died in 1025 without a strong successor, what followed was a revolving door of weak emperors. Many prioritized courtly luxury over military discipline, some even deliberately weakening the army, fearing ambitious generals. Despite the decay, Byzantium still had moments of strength, including its earlier expansion into the Bagratid Armenian kingdom during the 1040s, largely due to the Abbasid military decline. But the army was increasingly reliant on mercenaries and lacked cohesion. Meanwhile, external threats multiplied. Nomadic Pechenegs harassed the north, Norman adventurers pressed from the west, and Seljuk raids intensified in the east. And so rose Romanos IV, Diogenes, a capable general known for victories against the Pechenegs. After accusations of plotting against Emperor Constantine X Ducas, he was brought to trial, but in a fascinating turnaround, his military reputation and charisma spared him. He so impressed the court and Constantine's widow, Eudokia, that he was pardoned by the court and even married Eudokia, becoming emperor in 1068. Romanos immediately turned his focus to the military. He led campaigns against the Seljuks, and while he had some success, their fast-moving horse archers and mobile warbands continued to raid deep into Anatolia. In 1067 alone, cities like Caesarea, Melitene, and Antioch came under attack. Then in 1069, Iconium was sacked, dealing a major blow to Romanos' credibility and fueling calls for decisive action. Both the Byzantines and Seljuks were stretched thin by multi-front conflicts, Rome with the Norman incursion in the west, and the Seljuks with campaigns against the Fatimids in the south, so a temporary truce was arranged. But with internal unrest rising and confidence in the empire faltering, Romanos sought resolution. While Romanos had renewed the treaty with the Turks in 1071, it was likely a ruse. He assembled a large force of roughly 40,000 men, although Muslim sources cite a likely exaggerated 400,000 men, and marched east, aiming to reassert Byzantine dominance in Armenia by striking Seljuk positions near Lake Van. But the Seljuks were ready. Though Alp Arslan, the new sultan, had been focused on the Fatimids, he swiftly redirected his forces north, catching Romanos off guard with an unexpected approach through the mountains. Through strong reconnaissance, Alp Arslan knew exactly where Romanos was positioned, while Romanos assumed the Seljuk Sultan was still far off, or not coming at all. As such, he divided his troops, sending half to the nearby Kliat, while Romanos and his men marched to the fortress town of Manzikert, which he easily took. When the Seljuks came, what began as a series of skirmishes soon gave way to a Seljuk offer of peace. But Romanos, seeking a decisive outcome, refused, believing that his secondary Byzantine force, positioned nearby, would arrive when summoned. What became of that force remains uncertain. Romanos deployed his army in 4 independent units, hoping that this structure would allow flexibility against the fast moving Turkic horse archers. Arslan, meanwhile, avoided traditional engagement altogether, leaning into classic Turkic tactics speed, unpredictability, and harassment from a distance. Aware that defeat could spell the end of his rule and possibly the Seljuk state, Arslan is said to have delivered an impassioned speech before the battle, placing himself on equal footing with his soldiers and preparing to die alongside them. Whether fact or embellishment, the Seljuk ranks fought with cohesion and fervor. As battle commenced, Arslan's forces formed a crescent, attempting to stretch and isolate the Byzantine lines. Romanos, positioned at the center, made early gains, reportedly even seizing Arslan's camp before nightfall. But on the flanks, things unraveled. The Seljuks avoided close combat, showering the Byzantine wings with arrows and retreating before engagement. At day's end, Romanos ordered a withdrawal to regroup, but the movement sowed confusion, particularly among the wings, and created dangerous gaps between them at the center. Still expecting a larger engagement, Romanos prepared to fight again. But his other 20,000 men never arrived. His army was now isolated, fragmented, and vulnerable. To guard the rear, he had appointed Andronicus Ducas, despite his growing rivalry with the influential Ducas family. More on that shortly. Whether due to confusion or deliberate betrayal, Ducas abandoned the field. Romanos had finally gotten the pitched battle he wanted, but at the worst possible moment. Outnumbered, flanked, and unsupported, the Byzantines were surrounded. By all accounts, Byzantine and Muslim alike, Romanos and his men fought valiantly, but they were simply overwhelmed. Muslim forces note that Romanos, wounded and nearly unrecognizable, was found by a common soldier and brought to Alp Arslan alive, and the Seljuks had decisively defeated the Byzantine army. Enjoying this so far? Give us a like and subscribe. It helps more than you know and keeps this kind of content coming. Remarkably, Alp Arslan treated Romanos with dignity. Rather than executing him, he negotiated terms, a ransom and significant territorial concession in exchange for Romanos' release. But Romanos would never be able to fulfill those terms. As noted above, Romanos had long held a rivalry with the powerful Ducas family, the same dynasty that produced the previous emperor Constantine X. His marriage to Eudokia, Constantine's widow, may have secured his claim to the throne, but it did little to win over the Ducai, who viewed him as a usurper and a threat to their influence. Romanos had attempted to quell this tension by appointing Andronicus Ducas to command the rearguard at Manzikert. This move backfired disastrously. While uncertain, Andronicus may have deliberately held his men back in an act of betrayal, allowing the Seljuk assault to overwhelm the Byzantine lines, and perhaps even sealing the empire's defeat. Soon after his release, the Ducai declared Romanos illegitimate, captured him, and had him brutally blinded. He died from his wounds not long after, and with his death, the empire plunged into a civil war just as its eastern front lay in ruins. In the chaos that followed, Anatolia, long the empire's military and agricultural heartland, was overrun by Turkish warbands. The Seljuks had not originally come to annex territory, but opportunity shaped ambition. With little resistance, they established a new polity, the Sultanate of Rum. Rum, derived from the Arabic word for Rome, referred to the region's former Christian inhabitants and imperial legacy. Yet, despite the name, this was unmistakably a Turkic sultanate, ruled by the very nomadic warriors who had shattered Byzantine forces at Manzikert. Over the next 2 decades, they tightened their grip over central Anatolia, severing the empire from one of its most vital power bases as Turks poured in. As Turkish forces crept steadily westward, drawing ever closer to Constantinople, fear gripped the Byzantine court. With its armies gutted and civil war raging, the empire turned, reluctantly, to the Latin Christian West. Divides and centuries of mistrust made the alliance uneasy, but desperation overcame pride. This was now Christianity against Islam. The Byzantines appealed to the Pope for aid, and what followed would light a fuse that would burn for centuries, igniting some of the most brutal religious wars in human history. The Battle of Manzikert and the civil war that resulted from it completely altered the cultural, political, and religious landscape of the medieval world. Though the Byzantine Empire would linger for nearly 4 more centuries, its prestige as a global power died in August 1071. What followed was a slow unraveling. Despite some attempts at reconquest, the Byzantines would never again hold lasting control over the eastern homeland. Anatolia, once the empire's beating heart, was now in Turkish hands, and would remain so. Manzikert was not merely a defeat, it was the beginning of the end. In the wake of the Seljuk victory, waves of Turkic people surged into Anatolia, permanently altering its demography, a shift that lends to the country's current name. Turkey, named for the dominant presence of Turkish peoples across the peninsula. These migrants brought with them new political and religious structures that would take root and evolve. Though the Sultanate of Rum, established by the Seljuks in the aftermath of Manzikert, would eventually fracture under the Mongol pressure, it gave rise to smaller principalities known as beyliks. One of these, led by a chieftain named Osman, would eventually rise as the Ottoman Empire, arguably the most dominant Islamic empire in world history, and one of the most enduring empires of any kind. As noted earlier, the panic triggered by the loss of Anatolia pushed the Byzantines to seek aid from the Latin Christian West, igniting centuries long campaigns of religious warfare, the Crusades. Initially framed as efforts to reclaim the Holy Land, the Crusades soon became tangled in ambition and vengeance. Entire populations were slaughtered, and cities like Jerusalem and Constantinople were sacked. Far from a brief intervention, these wars became a defining trauma of the medieval world, with some estimates suggesting that 8 major crusades may have resulted in as few as 1 and as many as 9 million deaths. What began as a defensive appeal would unleash one of the most destructive and ideologically charged series of conflicts in human history. While some historians argue that Byzantine dysfunction and civil war played as great a role, if not greater, than the battle itself, Manzikert remains a clear turning point. It shattered the empire's eastern defenses, ignited waves of migration, and triggered a desperate call to the Latin West. Whether a final blow or merely the spark that started the fire, its aftershocks echoed for centuries, reshaping borders, beliefs, and the very course of medieval history. I hope you enjoyed this video and found this period in history both informative and enlightening. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, and I hope you can join us for another video. Thanks for watching.